Okay. Audio, we have audio? It is a lag. I heard myself. We obviously have audio. All right, everybody, thank you for joining us. I know this was, for those of you online, I know this was very last minute. For those of you in the audience, we actually have a live audience here, which is cool. Yeah, make some noise. All right, we have a live audience. That's kind of cool. And it's a decent size, so thank you. Sorry we're late and for some technical problems. Thank you for sticking around in spite of the fact that we only got high-speed internet at the very last moment. And I'm still convinced somebody's going to go disconnect that and say, "Oh, I've got a longer cable." Anyway, we've been this hotel is challenging here at Ocon, but we are all surviving. You guys got water back in your rooms? Yeah, that's good. Okay. All right, so I am broadcasting today's show from Ocon. Ocon is Objectives Conferences. It is, we're here in Washington, D.C. I have to admit that not my favorite place on planet Earth. Used to be. I used to love coming to Washington, D.C. I used to get kind of goosebumps from the Capitol and White House and all the monuments. I mean, if you haven't been yet to the Jefferson, those of you who are here, if you haven't been yet to the Jefferson Memorial and to the Lincoln, I mean, they're spectacular and they're beautiful, and the National Gallery is amazing. I was there. I spent half a day there yesterday, so I highly recommend going to the National Gallery. So it used to be like this, I mean, Washington still is, I mean, this meaningful place and this full of history and promise, and I've met the people who live here and govern us, and since then, I can't stand this place. It does not deserve its occupants. So the place is sacred in many respects. In any meaningful civilizational respect, this will be remembered as one of the great cities in human history because of what it represents and what was done here for about 100 years. But the creatures that populate the swamp just don't live up to it. I used to come to Washington a lot when I was CEO of the Institute. Used to do a lot of things here. For a while, we used to do events, which I really liked, events at the Capitol, inside the Capitol building. We used to do events for congressional staffers. So we used to get groups, and we figured out that if you offer them Chick-fil-A for lunch, they all come. So you get large audiences. Chick-fil-A is, for conservatives, Chick-fil-A is like, I don't know, like a 3-star Michelin restaurant. I don't think any leftists come when you serve Chick-fil-A, but the conservatives all show up. And we would do these events for the congressional staffers, and I loved them. I mean, the events were a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed them. But those were the people I really enjoyed meeting when I was here. But after the sessions, often people would arrange for me to meet congressmen or senators. I met dozens of congressmen and quite a few senators. And every time I walked out of their office, I felt like I needed a shower. And it didn't matter, Republican. I mean, they were all Republicans. I don't think I met any Democrats. And it was terrible. I mean, first of all, they weren't particularly intelligent. And they had nothing interesting to say. And they just wanted to know what you wanted from them and what you were going to give them in exchange for whatever it is that they were going to give you. So it was just an unpleasant experience, and my opinion of politics and politicians and Washington D.C. has only gone down since then. Let me just figure out what I can do here for the chat. All right, there we go. We do have some super chat already in. Thank you guys. I am getting complaints by some people who listen to podcasts that I ask for money too much. Some people are stopping to listen to the Ron Brook Show because I ask for money too much. So anyway, we'll have to figure out a better mechanism to get the money. Yeah, some people are nodding. Yeah, you're on. You ask for money too much. And I should ask you how much you give to the show. So, because the more you give, then the less I'll ask. I'm running the auction tonight for the gala to raise money. So this is what I do. So we're in DC. It's a fantastic place. Those of you who are here, I'll just say a few words on the National Gallery because I often give you kind of art recommendations, and people seem to appreciate that. So I would definitely go to the National Gallery. Right now, the National Gallery has more, if I'm not mistaken, but I think this is true, has more Vermeer paintings than any museum in the world. It has 3 and 1 attributed to Vermeer, so one that they're not 100% sure is Vermeer, and it's the least good of the 4 of them. You can tell that if it's him, it doesn't look like he finished it, but it's there. So the National Gallery has these paintings, so just for that, it's worth going to see. They're small, but they're truly striking, and you get, if you've read the Romantic Manifesto, Ayn Rand talks about Vermeer and that quality of light, and you definitely get that in the paintings, and they're definitely worth seeing. I will, those of you who are going to go now, I will point this out that they're not where they're supposed to be. So they're not in the rooms where they originally were, which is on the 2nd floor in the Flemish section. That section is closed for renovation. I don't know if it's just me, but every time I go to a world-class museum, half the museum is closed for renovation. So I have to go every few years to catch different segments that are not under renovation. So the old Flemish section in the National Gallery is under. So, but they do have the Vermeers and 1 Rembrandt, and it's a really amazing Rembrandt. It's one of his self-portraits from later in life, so it's very plotchy, but you get a sense of you get such a personality out of the painting that it's truly astounding. They're both on the 1st floor, kind of in a place where I don't think most people even go. So it's along one of the corridors. So just ask where they got their exhibit, and it's there. We bumped into it accidentally, and I said, "Why are the Vermeers here? This is like the middle of nowhere. Why would they put them here?" And when we went upstairs, there were big signs. This section is under renovation. We've put the Vermeers somewhere else. In the ground floor, you've got amazing sculpture. So there's a whole section of sculpture, which is definitely worth seeing, from really the Renaissance, but primarily Baroque and then 19th century. Some beautiful 19th century pieces are there as well. Then upstairs, you've got a great section of American art, particularly, I like American 19th century art. You got some really beautiful Bierstadt. If you know, Bierstadt was the landscape painter. He painted a lot of landscapes in the West. Beautiful paintings, but also some other good American artists from the 19th century there. And then they have a section of French and Italian. But again, stuff is under renovation, so you're not getting the full effect, unfortunately, but it's worth it. There is also, that's about a 20-minute walk from the hotel, 10-minute walk from the hotel is an American Museum for American Art. I think the whole museum is closed for renovation. Like they have 2 rooms somewhere. It's worth going. All of these museums are free. That's so you can go in, just quickly do the rooms that are open. It's worth it. They've got some good American art there. Again, they've got a magnificent Bierstadt there, it's so all of that is worth doing. Let's see. All right. Anything else so definitely get to see the monuments, Jefferson and Lincoln in particular. You can go up the Washington Monument. I've never understood the Washington Monument, just as a side comment, right? I never got that. I get the Lincoln Monument. It's beautiful. It's magnificent. I mean, the statue of Lincoln there, it's, I think, done by Daniel Chester French, if I remember right. And there's a beautiful sculpture of Jefferson and the quote, "We bring before reason, bring everything." It's on the rim. It's just magnificent. But then you get a Washington Monument, and they build an obelisk. Now, obelisk is a architectural structure from ancient Egypt, a culture of death. So what were they thinking? And I don't know if you know the story of the building of the Washington Monument, the obelisk. It's just a fun story. And the numbers are not going to be accurate here because I haven't read about this in a while, but approximately, it took forever to build this thing. It took like 50 years. It's like it's an obelisk, right? What that has to do with Washington, I have no idea. But it took them like 50, 60 years. They kept running out of money. They kept stopping and starting, and Congress would allocate some money and then not allocate, and then it was a civil war, and then something else happened. And the great contrast to this is the Statue of Liberty in New York City. Statue of Liberty in New York City was donated by the French, and it came disassembled with an instruction. You know, there's like when you build your desk, it came with a little instruction thing from the French sculptor who had built it. And it was unloaded into a warehouse in New York City. And it was, and they raised money. So the city wouldn't pay any money for it. And the state wouldn't do anything. So they privately raised money to assemble it and build it. And it was built like in months. And it was up and available. So private effort, government effort, you get, it's a good illustration of it. Of course, you can also take skyscrapers in New York in the 1920s. It took them nothing to build it. The Empire State Building was built like that. And today, it would take you longer to stand in line at the office to get the permit to build the skyscraper than it does to actually build the skyscraper. So it takes decades to build a skyscraper today because of the permitting, the licensing, and then the actual building takes forever as well because of union rules. And you remember, have you seen those photos of the guys up in the skyscrapers on the beam, standing, running around, eating lunch and stuff? Can you imagine? No hard hats? I guess because if they fell the 50 stories down, the hard hat wouldn't save them. But today they would be forced to wear a hard hat, right? Even though falling 50 stories down wouldn't help them, they would still be forced. And until the inspector gave them a check mark that they all had hard hats, they wouldn't get to build the skyscraper. So yeah, I mean, big difference. Anyway, I don't know how we got to that, but Washington D.C. All right. So Ocon started. The Objectives Conference for this year has officially started. We've had two general session talks. I thought they were two really good talks. One by Ocon this morning about the Dobbs decision, and one by Harry Binswanger this afternoon about open immigration. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about both of those talks and give you kind of, those are online, a little bit of overview and maybe my thoughts on each of the talks, and then we can start a new schism and object. No, and then and then we can. I'm you're inspiring me to make my pathetic attempts at being funny. Raka Ali is in the audience. Talk a little bit about it and then take questions. And I figured, I don't know if you'll have any questions because we're just talking about abortion and immigration. I don't know if that'll create any controversy or any questions. And as somebody said in the audience earlier when I said I was going to talk about those two talks, so you're committed to losing subscribers, huh? And yeah, it looks like it. This is the we'll cleanse the subscriber list and then start anew. So let's start with Dobbs. I thought Ocon did a fantastic job today because I learned something new from it, even though I've been talking a lot about abortion. I've done events. Obviously had Ocon on my show the other day, or I was in his show or whatever, to talk about abortion. So we've talked about these issues. But I thought his analysis, his discussion of, wasn't really a deep analysis, but a discussion of Roe and then discussion of Dobbs was really interesting. Both that he thought Roe was a better decision than most of the people that I talked to, right? Most of the people out there. Almost everybody that I've ever heard talk about it says, yeah, even if you support abortion, Roe is a terrible decision. It's like, and they, how these things happen? Enough people say it, and they say it often enough, and it just gets repeated and repeated. And it's like, yeah, Roe must be really bad. And even I am tempted by that. I haven't read Roe, and I'm not a legal scholar, so I don't think I would really know. But, okay, so Roe's badly decided. I'll still take it, but Roe's really... And I spoke to Anka a few days ago while he was preparing for this talk, and he said, no, Roe's actually pretty good. It's not great. It's not an objectivist decision. It's not what we would write, but it's pretty good as compared to all these other Supreme Court decisions. It's not a bad decision. It's not badly argued. And to the extent that it recognizes personal liberties, right, the idea of personal liberty, that's a fantastic thing because the courts doesn't really recognize liberty, and as Ocon described, liberty and individual rights. I've already figured it out. It looks like you're there for the internet. I've dragged the cable from the other room and it's working. So the cable's not quite long enough, but we've managed. So as long as it's not disconnected over there, we're going to be good. All right, thank you. Yeah, it's only an hour and a half late. So I thought this idea that Roe is actually pretty good was new to me, and the points about individual liberty was I didn't know, and then of course, the right to privacy has always been troubling because right to privacy, there's no real right to privacy, but hey, I'll take a right to privacy over no rights. So if you can justify protecting my freedom through privacy, then I'll take that over never justifying, not being willing to protect my freedoms at all. So that was I thought was really interesting. I think I read the draft of Dobbs. I didn't read the final decision. I thought Dobbs was awful, but then Oncar's convinced me it's even worse than I thought it was. It really is a bad decision. And the conservatives are cheering this decision. This is what's spooky about it. It's not just that these are supposedly really, really intelligent people. Like, I really think Gorsuch is really smart, right? I don't know about Alito, I'm suspicious. And this woman, Barrett, she's a Catholic cultist. She's not even just ordinary Catholic. She belongs to a cult within Catholicism. So she's a nutcase, but I thought Gorsuch was at least really, really smart. And Kavanaugh, I don't know. Hard to tell, Kavanaugh, but and Thomas I think is really smart, but this decision is really bad. And then you get a lot of these constitutional scholars at law schools who are applauding this decision, conservatives, right, applauding this decision. And I always thought originalism was suspicious, and I didn't like the textualism. We need to study the text, but now this idea of history, and we need to go, what were the common views at the time, and what were the laws at the time, what are recognized rights at the time when this was written. And a lot of this is driven by a negative thing, but a lot of it is driven by fear. And the fear is that if they recognize the idea of the Ninth Amendment, that idea of enumerated rights, and that we can even discover new rights, because as technology changes, you might have right to things that wasn't imaginable. But if they do that, they're opening up the door to the left, saying, well, then I have a right to a job, and I have a right to food, and I have a right to, right to freedom from fear. Wasn't that one of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's three freedoms? I have a right to all these things. That is, they can't conceive, since they cannot conceive of an objective perspective on rights, they cannot conceive of the idea that rights are objective. They're not intrinsic, they're not in you. God has not placed them in you. Nature has not placed it in you. But they're objective. There's something we as human beings identify as a necessity of social interaction, of human life, a necessity that results from the nature of human beings, right? But it's objective. And now we can look at new phenomena and say, okay, is this a right or isn't there? Is there a right to this or isn't there a right to this? Because we can take this principle of freedom to act and free of coercion, and we can use this principle to apply it to a variety of different concretes, but it is an objective principle. It does have a clear identity. No, see, once they give up on intrinsicism, once they recognize, and this is true of the religionists, once they recognize they cannot defend rights on the basis of religion, they can't write in their opinion, God did this and this, and God, and therefore they can't write that. So they don't have what they perceive as the only defense of rights, which is an intrinsic defense of rights that coming from God. Since they cannot defend that, what are they left with? They're left with subjectivism. And there's the subjectivism on the left, their subjectivism, there's all this, and they're afraid of that. That scares them because they can't defend themselves against the left in that circumstances. So as Oncar said, so instead of that, what do they revert to? The subjectivism of history. Whatever history did, that's okay. Whether they were right, whether they weren't, who are we to judge, right? To judge, we would have to have an objective standard. We would actually have to know what rights are. And we can't do that, unless we bring in religion, and we're not allowed to do that. And even then, what do rights actually mean? God didn't actually tell us, right? He gave them to us, but then forgot to tell us. There's no manual. He forgot to give us an instruction manual for the rights that he implanted in us. So they have this stuck. I mean, Ayn Rand always used to say intrinsicism at the end is always subjectivism, right? The idea that knowledge is you get from revelation is subjectivism because there is no revelation. So what do you, when you say God revealed this to me, what are you actually saying? I feel that. I dreamt it, I had a delusion, I was in LSD, whatever. It's your emotion. There's no, since God didn't talk to you, since there is no God, then it all boils down at the end of the day to subjectivism. There is nothing else. Shah's about here? There he is. All right, thank you. Appreciate it. I thought he was here. Is that 2 songs or 1 song? Are those 2 songs?
Yeah.
Okay. That's mine.
Hence the $200.
And yeah, okay, now I get it. Oh, Crosby, Still, Nash, and Young. I actually like Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Cool. Finally, somebody's asked me to review a song from a group that I A, know of, B, actually like. So Teach Your Children is a song I like the music of. I don't remember the lyrics. I probably hate them. Maybe they're good. I don't know. Most rock songs I hate the lyrics, but this one I like the music there. All right, where were we? So yeah, so it's this escape. They can't use intrinsicism because it means nothing. They're left with subjectivism. They're afraid to deal with their argument versus the left's argument in terms of what rights are because they probably lose, because if you're subjectivist in everything, it opens up to everything. So the only way they can limit the scope of rights to what they emotionally feel is the right thing to do is by referring to history, and they think they gain some objectivity there. Of course, even there, they pervert and distort the history, because this didn't come up in Uncast Talk, but it's interesting that they're using as the historical reference the 14th Amendment. So what they did was they looked in the Dobbs decision, they're using the 14th Amendment as the historical context. So they look at the laws and what was common in the culture in the 1960s, in the 1860s, right? In the 1860s America. And in the 1860s America, there were actually laws on the books criminalizing abortion. So that had been something that developed in the 19th century. What's interesting, though, is when the Constitution was written in 1789, there were very few laws on the books outlawing abortion. Indeed, common law coming from England viewed abortion as non-criminal if the woman would state that she had not felt the baby kicking yet. So if there was no, it's alive, vital, no vital signs, then there was no criminal prosecution, and that came from common law from England. So if they'd used the standard of 1789, they would have had to say abortion should be legal until, I don't know, heartbeat, viability, something, right? Instead, by using the standards of which they cherry pick, right, 1863, 1860, whatever, whenever the 14th Amendment was written, was ratified, 65 maybe. They get to not have any principle around abortion. What's interesting is the same court, same week, rules on guns. For its historical context, it uses 1789, not 1865. Again, they're using the 14th Amendment, which was written in 1865. But it's the laws on the books in America are not convenient for their case in 1865. So they cherry pick the 1789, and now they're referring to the Constitution and not to the 14th Amendment. So they're cherry picking their history. They're not even really doing history. They're cherry picking. And of course, history changes, so you got to cherry pick. So what is the generation that counts? What are the years that matter? Well, the years that are going to get me the answer that I want to get, which is the bottom line here. So I don't know. I've got to do this talk on optimism on Thursday. I don't know. It's very depressing when, some of the smartest people there are, Supreme Court justices, they've done a lot, they've gone through a lot, they're obviously smart people, and they don't get it. I mean, they don't get it. They don't understand. This is my sense of politicians. When I told you I used to visit congressmen, they just have no clue. They don't understand. And they have no concept. They can't think in principle. There's no principles on which they really rely. They know their position on concrete issues, and then they in a sense, they build the law to justify those positions. And that's why we have today a court where these are conservatives, these are liberals. We know exactly how they're going to vote. We know exactly how they're going to vote. There are a few cases where you get some mixture, but generally it's clear cut. Why? Because there's no principles. So, it's not that there are no principles. It's that the outcome is already set in advance in their minds. And now they just write a ruling to justify it, rather than struggling with the issue and figuring out what it really means and what the answer really is. So I recommend everybody who hasn't heard Onco's talk really listen to it, watch it on YouTube whenever it comes out. It was really good, and I think it gave some new dimensions to the whole Dobbs case, and it depressed me further than I was before. So it was more negative than even I thought the decision was, primarily because of how weak the whole process now is of making these decisions and describing them and arguing for them. They are. It's not good. All right, let's see. Do we have any questions on? I have a live audience, guys. Those of you who are online. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, I don't know, about 30 people, maybe a little less than 30, right here. All right, so any questions in the audience here on Dobbs, on abortion? Yeah, good.
I got one question about late-term abortion. I know it's rare, and I know that it's a rarity, and it usually happens at the late term. In cases where the mother's life is at risk, but in talking about freely chosen late-term abortion, is that a case where it's something that the mother has a right to do it, a clear-cut right to do it, but it might be morally wrong, or is that something I don't know? It's just a question.
I think the mother has a right to do it, and the mother has a right to do it because the fetus does not yet have rights. I mean, it's not have rights until it's individuated, until it's literally born. And it's not because the birthing canal is magic. It's not because a God, as soon as you're born, there you get the right. That whole perspective is an intrinsic perspective. It is that rights only arise in a social context. They're there to protect your action vis-a-vis your survival, vis-a-vis your ability to live. And the fact is, when you're in your womb, you can't act. You don't act. You're not self-generating. You're not a self yet. You're still part of the mother. You're still, I keep using Leonard's terms because I like them so much. You're still plugged in, right? You're not completely separate. And when you're born, even though you're dependent, you are now acting. You are now, for example, you suck at the tit, right? You have to do something to eat. Even if you're being breastfed or if you're being bottle fed, you have to use your muscles to actually get the food. When you're in the womb, you don't have to do anything. You're just there in suspended animation. Yep.
But if that mother fainted and she labored, she was passed out, she fainted and the baby came out, or if you cut the baby out of her and just left it on the table at 8 months old, it would survive.
Yes.
So how is it that you could kill the baby inside of her who's about to be born because she changed her mind? I can't grasp that. Well,
because before it's born, the baby, is not a human being. It's not that it changes in a fundamental sense, biologically and physiologically and philosophically in terms of rights. It changes when it's born. And when it's born, it is now a separate entity. Now, it's weird to think about abortion in the last few hours, right? And it's disturbing, and it's probably immoral in most cases because it's painful for the mother. It's for everybody, and I don't think any doctor would do it. I don't know any doctor who would actually commit an abortion in that state, in that condition. So I don't think it ever happens. But it's an issue of rights, and it's separate from issue of morality, an issue of professional ethics, and an issue of a lot of other things. Is, there has to be a point where a human being gains rights, and that point cannot be other than when you're actually separated. And that separation means that you're now, yes, you'd survive another few hours without having fed or something like that, but you're not in survival mode, right? You're just surviving. You could, if the bottle was put in front of you, you could do it, right? You're in the mode of, to the extent that you can as a baby, you're in the mode of acting to survive. You won't, that's the whole point. You won't survive unless you act, unless somebody else acts on you, right? But, and look, how rights apply to children is difficult. I don't know, right? It's not that when you're born, you just have rights just like you have when you're 20. You don't, right? Parents can use coercion on you as a baby, right? So it's not that it goes from 0 rights to 1. No, it is a progression. Now, you have those rights. They're held, in a sense, they're held now by your parents. They're responsible for you, and they hold those rights in, what's the word I'm looking for?
Trust.
Yeah, in trust. Thank you. They hold those rights in trust. And in a sense, as you make more and more decisions for yourself, you're gaining more and more rights. Not you're gaining, you're transferring that trust away from your parents to you. And only when you're legally an adult, all of those, now you're fully vested in the rights. The parents have no responsibilities anymore. And they don't hold them in trust anymore. But that whole issue of children is a complex philosophical question. I don't have the exact answer to it. So the status of the baby whose mother's abandoned or whatever, that's tricky, and it's not obvious. In that case, the government has to step in. Its job is to protect the rights of the baby because it can't protect the rights for itself. That's part of what government does. But again, these are kind of borderline situations.
Just to follow up.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is it would be immoral, but not illegal?
There are lots of things that would be immoral and not illegal. And I think most cases in which you've waited to the last minute to have an abortion would be immoral, yes. All right, I don't want to spend the whole time on abortion, but we can, yeah.
The most disturbing and perhaps most difficult is partial birth abortions, which do occur, or at least have occurred
Yep.
in recent times.
Yep.
Where they allow the head of the baby to be delivered, and then the doctor takes an instrument, crushes the skull,
Yep.
or sucks out the brains, and then deliver the last half of the body. And the image is so disturbing just to try to think about that it's really hard to do anything except gag.
I think that's right. I think it is very disturbing. The question is, should be legal? Should be illegal? And I don't think it should be illegal, but it is disturbing. And I think because it's disturbing, all of us want to see as few as possible, and therefore you want to make abortion in all its forms in the early trimesters, right? So remember, 21 weeks, 98.7. I think it's 98.7% of all abortions happen in the first 21 weeks. Even partial birth abortions, most of those partial birth abortions are a result of the deformity in the child, and as offensive as the partial birth abortion procedure is, I think it's less offensive than having a child that, I don't know, Zika is always what comes to my mind, because it is a disease that causes the child to be in pain constantly for whatever life they have, which is typically just a few years. They're constantly crying because they're constantly in pain. They have not a moment free of pain. Who would want to bring that into the world, right? So if you discover the Zika very, very late, you want to be able to do something about it. And that's what I think most of the very late term abortions are part of. It's I don't know of, I mean, I'm sure there are cases, and I'm sure there are crazy doctors who will do this, where I just don't feel like having this kid at the 9 month, and a doctor will do it. But I don't think there are very many, if any doctors would do that. And if they're medical professions here, I think they'll all attest that as a medical profession, even just for the health of the woman, you wouldn't force an abortion in that kind of condition. So it's, yeah, I think these are borderline cases that are really not at the heart of what the abortion issue is really about. The abortion issue really is about the first 21 weeks. That's really what it is about. Yeah, there was a question in the back. Yeah.
Just on the line that this now sends the decision back to the states and state sovereignty. I mean, surely states don't have the right to violate rights, even though they're supposed to have that sovereignty.
Well, but they don't recognize abortion as a right. So, yeah, but in reality, rights have a right to violate rights, but we know that. They already do. And so does the federal government. But yeah, this sends it back to the courts. But the other thing, and this it sends it back to the states, not the courts. But this is the sense in which Dobbs is so bad, right? One of the things that makes Dobbs so bad is that it defines America as a democracy. It is in a sense a nail in the coffin of republicanism. It's a nail in the coffin of constitutionalism. Because basically what it's saying is, whatever's not in the first 8 amendments, you get a vote on. Which is exactly what Madison warned us against, right? Madison did not want the Constitution ratified. He was against ratifying the Constitution because of the Bill of Rights. He said, what's going to happen with the Bill of Rights is they'll only recognize these 8 rights. And then what happens to everything else? And that's why they have a 9th Amendment. But the 9th Amendment, which is about enumerated rights, 9th Amendment, nobody talks about it. It's completely ignored, again, because they're afraid. As soon as they're afraid that if they open up the 9th Amendment, the content will be what the left argues the right to everything. Then and so it's driven by fear. Nobody wants to talk about the 9th Amendment. Thomas, who is the only justice that I know of who ever really talks about rights, it tries to ground them in the 14th Amendment, that first section of the 14th Amendment. What is it? No, not the due process, the other one. The court does due process. He wants to do it in something in immunities. Privileges and immunities, which in the 19th century was what rights meant, right? Privileges and immunities. But what they really should be grounding it on is the 9th Amendment. It's the enumerated rights. That's where it belongs. And Madison wrote about this. This is not, right? This is not, you don't have to have, right? I'm not a legal scholar. And anybody could figure this out. And that these geniuses on our court, I mean, again, it's not that they can't figure it out. It's that they're afraid because they don't know what rights are. Justice Scalia, I've said this many times on the show, Justice Scalia, the guy that the conservatives love, right? Justice Scalia thought that rights were nonsense on stilts, quoting Jeremy Bentham, right? So they don't know what rights are, and they're afraid to open that can of worms because they have no way to defend it. Yeah.
Do you think they're afraid of proliferation of phony rights, like a right to health care, so to speak, or that they're afraid of a proliferation of valid rights, like the right to bodily autonomy consistently held?
Yep. They're afraid of all of the above. But certainly they're afraid of legitimate rights. And one of the things that you see in the Alito decision is that he is afraid, he is anti. This is the whole point of Lochner, right? Lochner, if you don't know Lochner might be the most important decision the Supreme Court has ever ruled because it's all about economic liberty. And what the Lochner decision is a defense of economic liberty. And Justice Holmes, I mean, this is Oliver Winslow Holmes. You've heard of him. He's the most famous justice probably. He wrote a dissent saying that there is no such thing as economic liberty. And that view was upheld ultimately by the court in 1937. And so the view that there's no such thing as economic liberty overturns Lochner. And that was 37. It was FDR's PAC court that did that, right? It was trying to do it so the FDR could get the New Deal passed. Alito is anti-Lochner, pro the 1937 court. Alito is pro Oliver Winslow Holmes, who wrote, again, so Alito is anti-economic liberties. So even on the issue that Republicans are supposed to be good at, the conservatives are supposed to be good at, economic freedom, this court, these conservatives on this court are against economic liberty. They're against economic freedom. They're against contract rights. So you're absolutely right. Not only are they afraid, if they open up the issue of rights, do we get all these bogus rights that the left would like, but they're afraid we get all the good rights, the correct rights, the rights that we actually have, whether they'll recognize them or not. And it's exactly what they don't want. So they'd rather have this mushy concept because that serves their purpose. Yeah.
Didn't Alito make some reference to the Ninth Amendment in the decision, but what he said is that it needs to be founded in tradition,
Yes.
and then they decide which tradition they like. You already gave an example of that. So it eviscerates the Ninth Amendment. But then I had a second question. This isn't exactly abortion related, but I'd be interested to hear your opinion. If a baby is born drug addicted, because then once the baby's born, it has rights, then I would assume then that the mother should have no further involvement with that child.
So if the baby's born with a drug addiction, which means that the mother used drugs during the pregnancy, does that mean then the mother should not have any associated with the child? I think it depends. I mean, generally yes, but circumstances matter. I mean, was she taking painkillers because she was after surgery or something? So it would depend on the circumstances. It would certainly, you could easily view it as child abuse, and you could see the state intervening and finding it a home, or but it would depend on the exact circumstances of what was involved. Yeah.
Has the Federalist Society been bad all along? We just didn't know it because this was a surprise for me. So what's your thoughts on the Federalist Society and that this is, came out of Federalist Society judges?
So I have to be careful here, right? Because I speak for the Federalist Society a lot, and there are people in the Federalist Society who I like a lot, and there's certainly some of their people are very good. But yes, the Federalist Society has been bad all along, and this Federalist Society has always been a mixture of conservative legal thought, which is originalism and textualism, and you can see what that is. It ultimately boils down to subjectivism, and kind of a libertarianism. And again, what is libertarianism when it comes to principles and so on? It's mostly subjectivism. So I think what unites the conservatives and libertarians of the Federalist Society is a certain subjectivism. And it's because again, intrinsicists have to, where do they get their ideas from? Well, it has to ultimately come from a source. And more often than not, that source is their own emotions, their own feelings. Look, Federalist Society is at least raised the profile of the Constitution. It promotes the Founding Fathers. It has supported judges who have leaned in that direction. But it has, in and of itself as a society, I don't think it has positions on these things. It's more about promoting the judges who generally fit into this rubric. And I think the fact is that the best of those judges this is who they are. I mean, I don't know that if you'd picked other Federalist Society judges, you would have. And I've seen this. I mean, the guy who runs, I think Ilya Somin, the guy who runs the constitutional program at Cato, he charges the Constitution. He's libertarian and he's a really smart guy, and I like a lot of what he does. On this, he's terrible. I mean, so he again said, look, he says he's pro-choice, but he thinks Roe is an awful decision again, and then he says, yeah, there is no right to abortion, and then when you push him on the Ninth Amendment, he doesn't know where to go with it, because it's not like libertarians know how to define rights. I mean, the reality is that John Locke defined rights pretty well, and the founders picked up on that definition and used that definition, and that was an understanding, and that was pretty good. But the entire philosophical tradition post-founding has been anti-rights, has been emptying rights from context and challenging Locke's definition of rights and all of this stuff. And nobody has tried to really defend rights and present a proper definition other than Ayn Rand. And in that sense, Ayn Rand is the only Enlightenment thinker left, right? So there's Enlightenment. It dies with Kant and the German Romantics. And there's a little bit of liberal thought in England, but it's mostly not Enlightenment and certainly not rights-based. Again, not rights being nonsense. So Stilts was Bentham, who's British and part of that tradition. And I don't think Mill really has that kind of understanding of rights. So there is no understanding of rights until Ayn Rand. And that's true of everything in Enlightenment. There's no real defense of reason until Ayn Rand. There's no defense of egoism that is implicit in the Declaration of Independence and in a lot of the founders' writings, and in Locke. It's implicit there. There's none of that until Ayn Rand. So, until people recognize her genius and her contribution and her philosophy, there's no saving the country, because there's nothing else. They could go back to Locke, but they're not going to go back to Locke, because Locke has been justifiably criticized by many people. There are a lot of weaknesses in Locke, so he's been ripped to shreds. So a lot of modern philosophy dismisses Locke and the founders' philosophical thinking. The only philosopher they have, the only foundation they have for liberty and freedom and rights is Rand. And again, I've said this many times. I think one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century. Suddenly, I'm going to say this. I think this is true. The greatest intellectual tragedy of the 20th century. So, tragedy in terms of ideas of the 20th century is that the great geniuses of the 20th century, the late 20th century, who were generally pro-freedom, did not take Rand seriously. So imagine a world in which Hayek and Mises and Milton Friedman take Ayn Rand seriously. It's a different world. We're 50 years ahead in our and the sad thing is the libertarians have learned zero, zilch, nada, right? They're still not willing to take it seriously. They're not willing to engage with her ideas in a serious manner. They're not willing to learn from her. They're still trying to explain everything through economics and through economic incentives and they're still committed to their subjectivism, which is a dead end, which will lead to nowhere. Yeah.
I think I know what the answer to this is going to be, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you think this opens up any new opportunity for us to spread objectivism amongst potentially receptive people on the left, being that, as Omkar said, we're the only ones with the answer to why there should be a right to abortion? Is this going to wake people up?
I think it is a real potential. I mean, I have for many years thought that our audience, if we're talking about young people, our primary audience is not necessarily on the right, and certainly not on the religious right. That our real audience is in the science-loving center left, right? So not the wacky, the woke, people who've lost it completely, but the people who love Steven Pinker, the people who are engineers in Silicon Valley, who kind of buy into the woke, but are not comfortable with it. They feel uncomfortable. They don't have an alternative, so they go along. Because we've tried on the right. Now we get people from the right. I'm not saying you don't get, but I take somebody like, I don't know if you know Charlie Cook. You know Charlie Cook? Mm-hmm. Yeah, everybody's heard of Charlie Cook. You see him on Fox all the time. He's a big shot in conservative movement. He's the best buddies with Donald Trump's son. I knew Charlie Cook when he was in high school. Right? I met Charlie Cook in a coffee shop in Chicago when he was a high school kid starting out Turning Point USA. And at that time, he was passionate about Ayn Rand. He thought Atlas Shrugged was the best book he'd ever read. He was always a little religious, but he was mainly capitalism and freedom and Ayn Rand and individual rights, and he was going to do this. And he stayed in touch with me, and I spoke at Turning Point USA, and I'd see him around the country. And then I watched a few of his lectures on capitalism, which he gave back then, and he would basically took my talk. And he admitted, he told me he took whole sections of my talks and used them in his talks, right? So he would listen, and then, but look how easily he was seduced by power, I think, partially, but also by the religionists, by the conservatives, by all of that. It's very hard. If you leave that little bit of religion in you, it's very hard. You really have to abandon that. You really have to give it up. Otherwise, it's very, very hard. So, as far as I know, he has no interest in Ayn Rand. He might invite Alex Epstein to give a talk there because Alex focuses on energy and doesn't bring that up. But he'd never invite me. I haven't been invited to Turning Point. He doesn't. I've tried to contact him a couple of times for a variety of reasons, and he doesn't respond. He used to be really friendly and really nothing. And I think that's the process. Whereas Some of the best response I've ever gotten. What are the interviews that I got the best response from? Dave Rubin, when he was of the left, right? When he was just starting and he was left of center and he was moving away from the left towards the right, but he was still considered of the left, right? And that got me over 1,000 subscribers, and many thousands on Twitter, and got a huge positive reception. I still get people come up and tell me they discovered Ayn Rand because of that interview. And then Lex Friedman. And who does Lex Friedman attract? I think mostly people in the center left, center right, but who love technology, love science, love speculating about physics and about aliens and things like that. But people who want to expand, they're Elon Musk fans, people like that. I think that's, now Elon Musk is becoming a darling of the conservative right, but I'm sure he could say 5 things that he truly believes in that would really piss off the conservative right, because I don't think he's really conservative by any, he doesn't have the mentality of a conservative. So I do think that we have an audience that, so I often get asked, why do you think Silicon Valley votes for the Democrats? Why are they so democratic? And I've been asked this for 20 years, right? And my answer has always been, because so if you have a group of presidential candidates and you ask them the question, do you believe in evolution? And every single one of them says no. Or hedges, right? How could an engineer vote for a bunch of morons like that? I mean, an engineer's not going to. And that's basically Republicans, period. Like every presidential election, they ask the Republican candidates, do you believe in evolution? And every single one of them, once in a while, one of them will hedge, but most of them says, no, God created man, da, 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 da. So, so those are the people who are turned off by that. And associate, it's the same thing with why don't Hispanics vote for Republicans? Well, because Republicans hate them. It's a fairly simple answer, right? Harry mentioned it in his talk, right? So Hispanics, for example, in Texas are much more likely to vote for a Republican than Hispanics in California, because in California, they remember that Republicans launched this whole campaign to take away all kinds of, to really go after immigrants, right? And in Texas, they've never done that. So they view Republicans as hostile to them in California, and they don't. So this is not rocket science, why people vote the way they do. They've got an issue that's important to them. If you're an engineer in science, evolution is a big deal. It's like, do you believe in gravitation? This is not a rocket science. And they look at these idiots and they'd all say no, and they're idiots or they're sucking up to religious fanatics. Either way, how could you vote for them, right? So the few times I voted for Republicans, you have to close your nose, you have to really, you struggle. The same with the Democrats. You can't vote for anybody. So I think those are the key issues. Yeah.
Can you imagine a revitalized Democrat Party, like being more pro-capitalism?
Can I imagine a revitalized Democratic Party? I can't. I can't imagine it. I can't see it. Can I imagine a lot of young people who view themselves as Democrats who shift away from that? Yes. I think you're seeing it now. A lot of them are shifting towards Republicans, unfortunately. But I think that the woke stuff has alienated a lot of people from the Democrats, from the left, and I think that we have an opportunity here. I definitely think we have an opportunity here. Again, we're not going to convince a lot of Democrats about abortion because a lot of them are so screwed up on everything else, and abortion is just an accident that happened to get it right. But I do think young people who see it as a individual choice, as an individual liberties issue, and the separation of liberties to personal liberties and economic liberties, that we have to crush. We have to destroy that, and we have to show them that it's all one package, and you can't have one without the other. That's the appeal to both center right and center left, Republicans and Democratic kids, because you can get them on the flip side of that, right? So, look, and the other thing is, abortion's pretty popular in America, and the fact is that Republicans, it's popular among Republicans. It's not true that Republicans are unanimously opposed to abortion. Republican women in particular tend to be pro-abortion. I remember I gave a talk once, this is a long time ago, maybe, 18 years ago, 16 years ago. I gave a talk at a big conference in Colorado Springs. Something on capitalism was very rah-rah and got a standing ovation and everybody was happy. And then the first question came from a congressman, a guy who was just a former congressman, I guess. He stood up and he knew Ayn Rand and he was gunning for me. He wanted me to leave the stage on a negative note. So he asked about abortion. And I gave my 5-minute spiel about how abortion was a right and I was pro-abortion, in spite of the fact that this Colorado Springs, I don't know if you know Colorado Springs, but Colorado Springs is like the religious conservatives that, the Think Family, one of those big religious anti-abortion foundations are based in Colorado Springs. They have a whole compound, big signs on the highway. This is really the heartland of religious conservatives. And I said this position on abortion, and to my shock, a lot of people clapped. I thought I'd be booed. Some people booed, but most people clapped, and the clapping was all under there, and it was women, and it was almost all women, and they didn't want to admit it, but they were not anti-abortion, and so it's going to be interesting politically how this plays out politically, how it plays out in midterms, but how it plays out in state legislatures, because now Congress is not that important. What's important on the abortion issue is state legislators. Are Democrats going to gain in some of these state legislatures? Are pro-choice Republicans going to start speaking up in some of these states? It's going to be fascinating to really watch this. One more thing to make the elections interesting. All right, we're going to see. I might do the immigration topic next time. I'm doing another show, I think in 2 days from here. So we're doing 3 shows from here overall. So let me look over the questions. KFX says, I hope you're having a good time there, fun over there. Robert, who's here, there he is. Very much looking forward to why I'm still optimistic in spite of everything. Me too. I'm trying to figure it out. I keep hearing these talks and it's not helping. You know, when I prepare a talk, if I can get the beginning and if I can get the end, I'm pretty happy. I have the beginning. I know how I start the talk. And I'm still working on the end. No, the end, I pretty much know how I'm going to end the show. That's easy. The ending is easy. So now I just need the middle. I just need the content now. I make out like I don't prepare, but I'm constantly preparing. Wes says, sad I'm not here. Shaw's about, I need to save this, so I save the songs. I might ask you to send the names again if I lose this. But all right, Chad asks for $50. You talked about the Supreme Court's decision falling along predictable political lines. The justices are elected and confirmed politically. Is this outcome inevitable? Do you have ideas how it might be improved? Thanks for the in-person show. I don't know. I haven't thought about it enough to figure out if it can be improved and what would be an improvement. I definitely think, and this I think is important, there should be term limits they shouldn't be lifetime appointments. It should be long. They should be there for a long time. There also should be age restrictions. As I get older and as I see people I know and love and respect getting older, you decline cognitively as you get older. There's just it's just a reality. And even the sharpest people I know who still don't have Alzheimer's, they don't have dementia, they don't have anything. They just like we're slower running, we're slower physically. It just does slow down. And it's all of us. And, there's certain things that I notice about me, certain things I'm better at, but certain things I certainly notice, like I can't remember anything. But, I know people, and I've seen it in people I love, and my parents, right? People I respect. And you just see it slows down, even though they're still sharp. Even though if you ask them a professional question, what their career was based, they still have a good answer. It's just slower, it's just less, the Supreme Court should be the people, they should be at their peak. So it should be like between 50 and 70 maybe, or 50 and 45 and 65, something like that. And they should be a retirement age. And where that age is could change over time, because as we get better with longevity, that could expand the lifespan in that sense. But there really should be term limits, and there should be a date of maybe it's 75 for Supreme Court justice, maybe it's 70, I don't know. But it's something around that. But there's definitely decline. And if we don't recognize that, we're doing ourselves a disservice to ourselves and to the people around us if we don't admit to the fact that that's going on. So that should definitely be part of it. What else? What other reforms? I mean, I don't know. I mean, look, my main concern about the court is not that they're particularly political. My main concern about the court is they have no clue about rights. That's my main. So the whole, and you know, I'm really adamant about this, and I you know, it'd be interesting to ask some of the legal scholars around if they agree with me, but the whole Constitution is about rights. That's the whole point of this. There's nothing else there. It's, as Anka said, the whole thing is about liberty. It's not that you have to find liberty, where is it written? It's about liberty. You don't read word by word. You read sentences, paragraphs, and a whole document. The purpose is liberty. The purpose is rights. And if you don't have a concept of rights, there's no Constitution. It's meaningless. And I don't think there's a Constitution today. They pick and choose what they want. The left picks and choose what they want. Sometimes the right is right. Sometimes they did this, you know, everybody was cheering. Everybody's happy because they restricted the EPA on carbon emissions, right? Cool. It's good, right? Yeah, the outcome's good, but it's meaningless because it's not based on any principle, and it's not, you know, they haven't done away with the EPA. They haven't restricted the right of Congress to regulate what we breathe and regulate all that. They haven't told us where Congress can regulate and where it can't regulate. They haven't said anything like that. They just said the law that Congress wrote does not allow the EPA to do this. If Congress changes the law or if it adds a new law, it'll be fine. So we have no right economic liberty. It's just that the process hasn't been the right process. Okay, so I'll take it because we don't get as many regulations, but it's not good, you know, and they're not questioning, you know, Gorsuch might at some point start questioning the regulatory state. He's known for this. He doesn't believe in the alphabet agencies. He thinks they're unconstitutional, I think. So I'm hopeful for Gorsuch in that perspective. But he's going to be in the minority because maybe him and Thomas would do it, but I don't think any of the other justices would join in. But there's no principle. There's no movement in the right direction on any issue, even when they rule in a good case. That is where we feel happy, right? It's not going to be a principled. Right? And even if they overturn, I don't know, Obamacare, they'll overturn it for the wrong reasons. They won't overturn it for the right reasons. And they won't exclude the possibility of Congress passing a Socialized Medicine Act. They'll do it on some basis of, I don't know, a tax is not a fee is not a tax. I can't remember what the, or a mandate is not permitted. Or they won't say socialized medicine violates the economic liberty of us to contract with a service provider for our own health care, and insurance companies shouldn't be regulated, things like that. They won't do that. They're incapable of doing that. That's my main concern. The political aspect of it, as we become more polarized, is the term they used, as we become, then the Supreme Court, like every other institution in America, is going to become more politicized and is going to become more partisan, is going to become more hateful of the other side. And that's not going to be helpful for life in America. It's not going to be useful. But you're seeing that everywhere, the tribalism. All right, Landon says, I miss being at Ocon. It was the best event I'd ever been to last year. All right, thank you, Landon. Oh, and he remembers the poker from last year. Poker on Wednesday, don't miss it. It'll be fun. Bonnie says, so wish I was there. Thanks for this. Thanks, Bonnie. Landon says, you do ask for money too much, but you're great. All right, I'm going to try to ask, God, I don't know how this porn thing gets on my chat. They start flooding you. There's some bots I didn't even mention sex once in this talk. Thanks, Landon. All right, he says, a great subject for this talk is what was your best last Ocon event? What was your best last Ocon event? My three are Luke Travis' tour, Gina Golin's talk, and poker with Iran. Poker with me ranked up there. Wow. I don't know what my best last. I don't remember. What did I talk about last year? What's that?
30.
Oh, yeah, oh, my God. That has to be number one most nerve-wracking talk I've ever given in my life. I was more nervous about that talk than any talk I think I've ever given. Certainly in my more professional years. I didn't sleep the night before. I was so nervous. Literally didn't know, no sleep the night before. Because it was about Leonard Peikoff and I knew he was going to see it.
It didn't show.
What's that?
It didn't show.
I know, but a minute before I got up there, I was a nervous wreck. And as soon as I got up and I started, it went away. And there was still a voice in the back of my head, be careful what you say. But no, because it's not written out, God, I mean, who knows what my subconscious would feed me. And Leonard's going to watch it. But he did watch it and he loved it. So he called me up and he complimented me on it. And he had the 3 things he loved the most. And it was great. So it was really, really nice. But I was so nervous around that. I don't know. I don't have a ranking, and Ocon has been work for me for since I only attended 2 conferences that were not work for me. I think only 2, maybe 3 or 4. 1987 was Steve. Steve was there with me, and 1987 and 1993. 1995, I was already running the conferences. So I was, I was Anu, and I was the whole AOI team. That was me, because like 3 of us put on the whole conference in those days. And so I did 95, 97, 99, and then I joined the Institute, and the conferences work since then. So, okay. So I don't know, and I don't remember anything anyway. So, Seymour says. He says, asking for money is part of the charm of the show. Do you have a twin brother here at Ocon? No, I don't have a twin brother. It's me at Ocon. It's not my twin.
There's someone that looks just
Really?
like your brother.
I think there was.
You're going to have to introduce me because I've never met him. All right. Simo's here, so he was just explaining in the audience. All right. London Wall says, are you in Atlantis Legacy? I am. Atlantis Legacy is where you leave some money to the Institute in your will. The Institute's not number 1 in my will. It's contingent because my wife and then my kids. But I'm still young. So they hopefully by the time I die, there'll be a lot to go around. Or maybe not. Maybe I'll spend it all, which is ultimately the goal, right?
Yeah.
The point is not to leave any money to anybody. The goal is to spend it all. So that's my ambition is to die with nothing. Don't tell my kids. All right, Landon's on a roll here. Could it be that the decision erodes away the reverence for the law and the court, or could this wake people up to how extreme things have gotten? No, I think it erodes. The whole process erodes the trust in the court. It is viewed now as them against us. It's no longer viewed as the subjective entity that's really trying to figure out what the truth is or what the Constitution says. It's viewed now as the conservatives always wanted to get rid of Roe versus Wade. They found their chance. It has nothing to do with the Constitution. It has to do with subjectively who was there, happened to be there at this time. The leak didn't help. The fact that this document was leaked didn't help. The other decisions that surrounded, particularly the gun decision, didn't help because suddenly they're overturning state laws when they're just advocating for so-called state rights. I think the court is now going to be viewed much more as a political entity than it has in the past. And look, I've said this before, and I still believe it, that generally the courts are still, relatively speaking, a bastion of reason as compared to legislatures and as compared to the executive branch. But this does definitely erode the quality of our courts generally, because remember, the Supreme Court kind of dictates to the federal court system. The whole system now plays to those principles. And even if they're judges in the system who don't agree with the Supreme Court, they don't have a choice. They have to abide by what the Supreme Court decides. All right, Bonnie, rights can be enumerated because they're endless. Absolutely. They embody every human action is not coercive. Yes. The right to life is the right to act. Our lives depend on reason and freedom and the freedom to use it. Absolutely. So you can enumerate the rights. It's meaningless. I mean, there's only one right in that sense, right? There's the right to life. Everything else that is required for your life, in the fullest meaning of required for your life, is you have a right to. That's it. And even the stuff that is not required for your life, even stuff that's required for your death, because we can't ban action, you have a right to. Right? So poison and committing suicide and all that stuff, you have a right to, even though it leads to death. Michael asks, how do individual rights apply to conjoined twins? Somebody asked me this today. I don't know. It's complicated. It's complicated. Because if they're conjoined and let's say you cannot separate them, it's two entities occupying two consciousnesses, occupying the same biological space. I don't know. It's one of these weird borderline, and I don't know exactly how. You'd have to ask one of our philosophers if they've thought about that. Luckily, that's pretty rare, particularly today when they can tell, because we have abortions, they can tell in advance. But maybe they'll be less rare in the future. But it's what a horrible position to be in. And now sometimes they can separate them if they don't share a vital organ. They can separate them, but they share a vital organ. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know what kind of life it is. I don't know what it even how you do it. Let's see. Jeremy asks, is Jeremy here? Yeah, there he is. Thought I saw you. Jerry Garcia played the pedal steel guitar on Teach Your Children. Oh, I didn't know that. Which is why the music is so good. Oh God, he's a deadhead.
I love the music.
Yeah. All right. No, I like Crosby, Still, Nash. I even like Crosby, Still, Nash and Young. I even like Crosby, Stills, because they put out records in all of those combinations. So even when Jerry Garcia wasn't there, it was good music. So Neil Young is a good musician, and I think Crosby and Nash are good musicians as well. I remember vaguely from my teen years listening to Nash solo albums, and they were good. At least I thought so back then. But then what did I know then? All right, Harper Campbell. Is abortion also important to prevent low-income, low-intellectual horsepower population overbreeding and burdening the welfare system? No. We're not eugenicists. We don't. No. The fact that you're born, one of my best friends is here at a conference. She worked with me at the Institute for years, but I've known her for a long, long time. And she was born low income. I can't remember the exact circumstance, but she was in foster homes her entire childhood. And, she was raised by aunts, just a horrible, like one of these nightmare scenarios. And she became like the chief financial officer of one of the largest corporations in the world, right? You can't extrapolate. You can't do that. You've got, every individual is an individual. And when you're not the product of your parents in the sense of who you are is you. You get to make those choices. You get to shape your soul. You get to choose who you are. We're not about population control. This is why I'm for open immigration. This is why you don't choose immigrants, or you don't choose your friends based on the color of their skin or any other, or their socioeconomic status. You choose them based on their moral character, who they are, what kind of a person they are, whether they share your values or not. And that can come from anywhere. I mean, you might be aborting some low horsepower, whatever the hell that means, but you might be also aborting some Einsteins. Was Einstein born to really, 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 really high-income parents? Middle class, I can't remember who his parents were. But the point is, a genius could come. I mean, remember that Steve Jobs, his father was a student from Syria. I don't know if it was maybe Muslim, maybe not Muslim, but an Arab, right? We don't like Arabs, right? We can't have them. And yet, Steve Jobs. You can't do this. And of course, they're geniuses who are Arabs. Just, think back to some of the Arab philosophers of the 12th century were geniuses. So the whole way of thinking is collectivistic, and it's not the way we think about the world. It's about individual rights. It's about individuals. And it's not about population control. It's not about maximizing population. It's not, it's not about any of that. And I want more kids. I don't want less kids. So I should be against abortion, I guess, because I want more kids. It doesn't even work that way. Because, certain types of cultures have fewer kids. And I think unfree cultures tend to have fewer kids. And I think pessimistic cultures have fewer kids. And confused cultures have fewer kids. I think kids are a product of optimism and confidence and benevolence. And, the only Western country in the world, Western developed countries, not Western developed, because this includes Asia. So the only developed country in the world, it's a developed economy in the world that has above replacement kids is Israel. Only one. And that's not because of religion, because this is true even among secular Jews in Israel. They have 2.4, 2.24, something like that. They have over the 2.1, which is required to replacement. Even the secular Israelis have that, right? And why? I think that over the last 20 years, Israel has become an optimistic, positive society that is confident in the future. It's like, stick it to the enemy, don't give a damn about the threat external, and they're going to thrive and they're going to succeed in spite of everything. And the tech boom has infused them with this confidence they can do anything, that they can become rich, that they can become successful, and they're having kids. And every other society in the West, America still has relatively more kids than most but we're not replacement, we're under replacement. Without immigrants, we would be shrinking. So we're below replacement, but very close to replacement. And in Europe, they're depressed. Who the hell wants to have kids? Is Greta going to have kids? Can you imagine Greta having kids? No, so it's all related. So please, none of this eugenics stuff. Michael asks, what do you make of the saying, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good? I mean, there's a sense in which this is right, and there's a sense in which this is wrong, right? So there are many activities we engage in life where, it's not worth the extra effort to make something perfect. It's just not worth the extra effort to just get it. And sometimes it's impossible or just not possible to do, right? And if you've ever done renovations in your home, right, how many contracts can you go through? There's a point at which you're going to have to say, it's just not worth it, right? And that's where it's good enough, right? It's good enough. I'm going to love it. I'm going to enjoy it. Steve is laughing because he knows what I'm talking about. And going for perfection, maybe you can achieve it. It's just going to be so costly, not worth it. And then there's certain things in life that you always should strive for perfection, right? And you should never settle for anything short of that. And it's not even about achieving perfection. It's about striving for perfection. Certainly in moral character, you should always strive for perfection. That's what it means to take morality seriously. That's what the virtue of pride is. It's the striving for moral perfection, right? And you should never settle and say, oh, well, I can't be perfect, so I'm going to lie just sometimes, right? And that's a disaster, right? That undermines everything in morality for you. So don't let a lot of time in business, it's good enough. The product is good enough. Perfection will cost us so much money that we'll never get the product out the door. Right? So you have to know in which context it is appropriate and which it is not. Liam asks, how do you respond when people say, no other developed nation has tried your radical individualistic ideas? If they are so obvious, at least one nation would have done it by now. So first, I've never claimed they're obvious. None of my ideas, none of Ayn Rand's ideas, they're not my ideas in that sense. None of Ayn Rand's ideas are obvious. If they were obvious, first of all, other thinkers would have thought of them. Other thinkers would have thought of a few of them. But no, this is radical, different, hard, and it takes work to grasp and goes against everything else that's out there. So I never say that these are obvious. I even don't like in the Declaration of Independence, which is basically a perfect document, I don't like the self-evident truths, right? Because there is no Those are not self-evident truths. Those are hard truths. And the founders fought hard to figure those truths out. They're men of the Enlightenment. They studied, they learned. So it's an unfortunate, of course, I don't think they meant it self-evident in the same sense that we do. But so one is, it's not obvious. The other is, there was no America before there was America. So the fact that no country's ever tried something doesn't mean it's not the right thing to try. Before there was the United States of America, there'd never been a free country in the world. Freedom had never been tried. Oh, it must be bad because nobody else has tried it. No, the fact that other people are not trying something doesn't mean you shouldn't. There is no wisdom of the crowds applies narrowly, not broadly. Yes, we are still a young species. I don't know, 100,000, I don't know what the Homo sapiens as we are today, 100,000, maybe 200,000 years been around. We've only resurrected reason individualism. That's only 250 years. That's nothing. Even within the 100,000, 250 is nothing. Never mind the millions of years life has been in existence. We haven't tried a fraction of all the things that we're going to try. There's still a lot of truth to be discovered and figured out and done in the future. And just because somebody's never done it before. I mean, imagine if the Wright brothers had that. Well, nobody's flown before. Can be done, right? Yeah. Nobody's built a computer before. Not going to build. I'm not going to be the first, right? All right. James. Clarence Thomas said on video he's read and admires a lot of Ayn Rand's writing. He particularly has respect for the virtue of selfishness, but I guess his Christianity override that for some reason. Yes. I mean, I know Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas actually has a annual viewing party of The Fountainhead, the movie, for all his clerks. So his clerks are required to attend an annual viewing of The Fountainhead. He's definitely a fan of Ayn Rand's work. I know he's read The Virtue of Selfishness and has said positive things about it. I think he's read Ayn Rand's views on rights and on government. And I think of all the judges, I certainly thought this before Trump. I'm not, somehow I think Thomas has been distorted and perverted by Trump, like a lot of good people have been. I always thought that Thomas was the best justice on the court, the most intellectual, the one who had, really the only one, maybe Gorsuch now, but up until now, the only one who had a conception of rights. Not completely right, but a conception of rights. And so what does undermine Thomas? Two things, I think. One is religion. He is still very religious in spite of his admiration for Rand. And second is his wife. His wife is a nutcase. I've met her. I've seen her speak publicly, and she's a populist Republican in the worst kind of sense of the term, and a very religious conservative, very much so. Nowhere near the kind of firepower he has. Nowhere near the kind of the intelligence and the approach that he has. She's just a populist. I met her before in 2016. So when Trump was running, and she was just, I thought she was awful. It was embarrassing. But yeah, and I think Thomas's opinion with regard to Dobbs was better than Dobbs, so it has, because it's trying to get away from the due process, from the process section of the 14th Amendment to, he's trying to find rights. He's trying to grasping there. I wish he'd talked more about the 9th, but James says, what do you make of the Supreme Court throwing out those major EPA regulations? Is it possible the court does more good than harm? Unlikely, because even when they throw out this stuff, they don't throw it out for exactly the right reason. Again, the only reason they threw it out is because it's not explicitly in the law. If the law was different, they wouldn't throw it out. So it's not like they're against the EPA on principle. Again, I think Gorsuch and Thomas might be against the EPA on principle, but I don't think any of the other justices will go along. So, look, you were going to get some decent decisions by this court on economic issues, particularly on regulatory issues. They're not fans of the regulatory state. So we'll get a reining in of the regulatory state from this court. That's the one good thing they will do. But again, given Alito's discussion of Lochner, they're not pro-economic liberty, so they won't be reigning in the regulatory state because of economic liberties. They'll be reigning in the economic state because they think it's unconstitutional in the sense that the regulators write the rules when Congress should write the rules. But they're not against the rules. The rules are okay. It's just the Congress should write them, not the regulators. So it's a process thing. It's not a principle thing. But yeah, you're going to get some good decisions out of this court in terms of the outcome. Michael says, a fantastic way for you to get your name out there would be to start debating major anti-abortion figures like Ben Shapiro. I told Ben Shapiro when I met him, and I did my interview with him, that next time we should deal with more contentious issues because I thought the interview was too friendly. And I mentioned abortion, and he said, yeah, we should do that. So the problem with Ben Shapiro is this, that he charges something like $100,000 to debate. So if somebody's willing to pay Ben Shapiro $100,000 to debate me, I think he'd do it. I don't think he wouldn't. So it is really an issue of money. Shapiro is, I think he's 100,000, maybe even more than that. But that's the range of. We almost got him to do something with me at Clemson University, but then Clemson heard how much he wanted and said, "Whoa, we can't do that." He does. He has a discounted rate through Young Americans for Freedom, I think, or Young Americans for something, but they won't do debates. They will only pay him to give speeches. And they would never have him debate me because they know me too well. I mean, they don't want to give me a stage. Let's see. Eva says, religions consider marrying for life a duty. Why would objectivists promise lifelong marriage to their partner when selfishness requires that they evaluate the usefulness of the partner at each stage in life? I have to talk about this with my wife. Let me tell, what's more usefulness to me these days? Let me see. Let me make a list. It's not exactly the right way to think about selfishness. So first, I don't know that in a marriage ceremony you should commit yourself for life. I think what you're committing to in a marriage ceremony is the intention. And the intention is to be together for life. And this is why divorce is okay, and it's okay for objectivists, even if they've sworn in marriage, because you're expressing an intention. It might not work out because you don't know what the future holds. So it's an issue of intention. And the reason of the intention is that this is not a fling. This is not a one-night stand. This is serious. This is something where the kind of relationship we have is we're planning this out for the long term. This is a life commitment, but it might not work, and therefore there's definitely an out, right? But I don't think the right approach to selfishness is you run around with a balance sheet in your head, pluses, minuses. Let me add it all up. It's not a sense because, you for example, there's certainly periods, where maybe one spouse is sick, and you're not getting anything out of them at the moment, right? But you love them. And the love is not contingent on getting something at any given point, but you love them as a human being and everything that they represent, everything that they were, right? And everything that they could be, right? And maybe it turns out that this is towards the end of life. It's not everything that they're going to be because they're not going to be. But how could you turn your back on this person that you've loved your whole life, that you love now because of what they were, even if they're not living up to that right now? And, and that love doesn't go away because they stop cooking. The love doesn't go away because, I don't know, they're sick and you can't have sex. The love doesn't go away because they're sick and you can't have a conversation. It doesn't go away because of what you are and the bond you have between us. It's selfish to stay, and even though you're not getting anything in return at that moment. But the whole idea of selfishness as momentary trade, right now, we're trading right now, is wrong. It's, in a sense, it's a spiritual and long-term trade. It's trade, but it's not trade, material trade, and it's not trade in the moment. It's about, and it's the same when we say, I love humanity. I have, I care about people in other countries. Not because they give me anything, but because I understand the value humanity, other people, good people who produce have to me, right? And I understand that not in a sense of any particular person having to give me right now, but in a sense of what they represent as a human being, as an abstraction. So if they turn out that they're nasty people, I hate them, right? I can immediately change. So there's nothing unconditional here. But the idea of human beings is something that I love. And that is selfish without being transactional. Selfishness does not mean transactional. Right? It's not anti-transactional, but it doesn't mean transactional. It's broader than transactional is one aspect of it, right? So, you promise lifelong, you don't really promise, but you commit to trying for the lifelong because that's the kind of relationship you want. If you don't want it, that's fine. I have no problem with 10-year marriages. If that is workable, I don't think it is, but if somebody wants to try it, you can have short-term contracts. You can do a lot of things in a free society. Once we divorce marriage from religion, and once we divorce sex from religion, when we divorce relationship from altruism, who knows how our relationships will evolve? I think we're a young species trying things, under freedom for a very short period of time. So I think human relationships, we still haven't yet completely explored all the options and possibilities. But the whole idea of marriage is that it's a long-term commitment that you're going to try out, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So it's not a promise in the sense that you're gonna walk away, and it's certainly not a duty. It's not a duty. And again, Eva, you really need to think about the concept of selfishness and what it means, and get away from the transactional nature of it. All right, Gene asks, what room is Yaron in? Friend is looking for it. I don't know what room. 16, room 16, but it's too late because we're ending. It's 6? God, I need to go get dressed. And thanks, everybody. Thank you guys for coming, being a live audience. More fun with a live audience. I should invite you all to my condo and we can do it there. I showed somebody a video of my condo and he said, don't show this. You'll never raise money again. All right, guys. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.